Hi, HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. On today's show, we're joined by Tim Toterhi, CHRO at Cenduit. Tim, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
You know, Tim, you're the first TEDx speaker that I've had on the show. So special moment for me today.
It's a great experience.
Actually, one of the only CHROs that I know that have done one. Is there other TED Talks out there with CHROs?
I think there are. There's a few,
Yeah.
but I mean, it was like I tell you, it was a great experience. The people were fantastic, and it was a great process to go through to hone that message and be able to share that. It was quite an honor to do that.
Amazing. Before we jump in, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
Sure. For me, a lot of folks say that they fall into HR, like we're walking down the street and suddenly they became an HR officer. I stalked HR like it owed me money.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I really wanted to.
That's unusual.
To get into HR. It just took a while, and I think if I go back a little bit, I grew up in the 70s in New York as a kid, and sometimes I joke it's the 1870s. It feels like, but when I grew up then, I didn't know a lot about career paths back in the old neighborhood, but it seemed like there was two schools of thought. Folks would jokingly go into to be a cop or a criminal, and I didn't look good in orange, and certainly didn't have sort of the wherewithal to put on the utility belt of a police officer. So I tried to do a variety of different things. And I think you and I share a bit of a background listening to the show in that there wasn't a lot of financial wherewithal in the early days.
Nope.
Yeah, we used to call, say it was the funds are low, disease. You got no cashish. So what I did is I just took a lot of different jobs, and I worked through high school and went to college at night, and I think I counted up at one point, I had 20 different jobs on the way to and through school. And
what were some of those jobs? Because I will share some good jobs. I've got some for you as well.
Well, it was all over the place. I mean, I delivered patio furniture. I probably did every single job that you could do in a restaurant really poorly. So, busboy, waiter, dishwasher, I'd be the waiter that would bring you a soup and forget your spoon, that sort of thing. So I didn't quite find the calling. I taught karate.
Taught karate. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I did. Writing was kind of anything you could do to make a buck as you were working through school. And that was a process. You take a class at night, you save up, you take another class, and you kind of go through that process and try to make it happen. And I think, for me, the big learning that came out of that experience as I started the career was that if you wanted success in any endeavor, even if it was just getting through school, you needed to have three things. And that is all about having a bit of perspective, having some persistence, and having creativity. Everybody, as you know, is given a certain amount of talent they're born with, and they can leverage that if they're lucky. And then luck, happens. We can fall backwards into that every once in a while, but we can't control those two things. So with the other three, that's all up to you. And as I worked through my career, going through school, I actually took a job in sales. I had a job in nuclear sales for a while, which was a weird thing. I got through that through writing. Yeah, going door to door selling nuclear, a little bit different than that. But ultimately, it led to a job in HR, but it took a while. It took a while to kind of get through that process and hone in on what your passion is. To make that happen.
But I love this point, because it's rare that I have someone like yourself that's been like me, that's had so many different jobs growing up, and we're both from similar backgrounds. Mine was single parent, 4 kids, council estate, living on benefits, not much financially to help support our family. So all of my brothers and sisters had multiple jobs growing up, and that was normal. And I think looking back, I hated it, right? But now I'm like, it was such a blessing. And I learned so much from each of those different jobs. So, just to share with some of you guys, I was a chef for 2 years, right? Working with my brother, and every Sunday he would leave me and I would run the whole kitchen on my own. And I was like, just turned 16 and I'm running a whole kitchen. Like, right. And looking back now, I'm like, how the hell did I do that? And then on weekends, I used to be an ice marshal. So I used to teach ice skating which is a really random thing to do in the UK, but only during the Christmas holidays. I worked for a judge. So I was like a PA to a Crown Court judge, one of the highest ranking judges in the UK. And I was his assistant. And that was fascinating, as you can imagine, getting an inside look into all those different things. So many different jobs along the way, but now I learned so many different things from all of those as well. So I think although it was a tough time of my life, the lessons learned, the hard work, learning a whole different new skill on every few months was painful, but also going through that experience meant that by the time I hit the corporate world, I was like, this is easy. I've gone through try being in a kitchen for 16 hours straight in front of an oven, like with a ticket machine, pumping orders through just constantly. That's what you call stress.
Oh, absolutely. You get it's a different world. You get a lot of perspective, and you're right. You learn things as you go, and then what I found is you get tested along those times. So I had to share this with you. I was going through that process and working through the day, going to school at night, and the neighborhood back in the day wasn't so hot. And I actually, even though I was a martial art teacher, shows that anybody can be a victim at any time. I was in a restaurant at one point, and a guy tapped me on the shoulder and asked for a cigarette. I don't smoke. I went to turn around to tell him that, and crashed me in the face, brass knuckles, right? Totally.
Really?
Yeah. And it turns out that he was a little gang guy who was actually thought I was somebody else, right? So this kind of puts you in a really bad financial situation because you're no insurance, you're totally tapped, you're trying to figure stuff out, and this now you thought you were in a bad situation before, and now you can't get a job. You can't get an interview. If you were going to get an interview, you'd have to bring a banjo to kind of work because you're all discombobulated. And so, I called my grandfather at the time, and I was talking, lamenting my situation. Oh, this is terrible for me, that sort of thing. And he listened, and then he's kind of given guidance about how he grew up, and talking about he didn't go to college until his 60s and did it really late. And you leave that conversation realizing that it's really hard to complain to somebody who lived through World War II and the Depression.
So true. And the new kids in this day and age, I'm like, guys, you have no idea.
You totally feel like a putz doing that,
Yeah.
So it was interesting. But what was helpful with that is, I took away from that lesson was, okay, this is a temporary thing. You could view your situation in a different light, and then you can go back to work. And then, as you're going through that work, you can get creative. And so one of the things, just to what helped me, jump into the HR is to finish school. There was this program that I had at the time called Life Experience Paper. And so I'm going at night school. So I'm in my early, 20s. Everybody's in their 30s and 40s. And they had this program that said, if you were an accountant, you could write a paper about accounting and get some credit. So I asked them, I said, well, how many papers can you write? I said, well, nobody's ever asked that before. I said, well, how many credits can you apply for? I said, well, nobody's ever asked that. So the wheels of creativity started spinning. I said, fantastic, I'll write 5 of them. And so just applied for everything, PhD in meteorology or whatever it is. And so kind of expedited the college experience, and then got me into grad school. And so just looking at things differently, taking a different shot, then you're launched through sales, and you start off jumping into the next career, which was fantastic. And I launched into HR through selling training. So taking one skill, capitalizing it to go into the next. And that's where I said I stalked training, I stalked HR, and just brokered one skill, writing and sales, to get into the next one.
That's a very important piece of information that you've said there, because everyone seems to struggle about, what do I do as my career? And I really struggled growing up. Like you don't know that when you're, when you're in school, you're not really thinking of most people aren't thinking, this is exactly what I'm going to do, right? And what you've done and what I did, but in our case, it wasn't by choice. We kind of had to, right, financially, but we tasted so many different things. And most people don't do that. So they come out with this idea of, I'm going to, I would say 80-90% of my friends don't have a job in what they studied. I'm sure most people are exactly the same, because I think the best thing to do, and you did it, I did it, is to taste as many different things as possible. And then you find what you like and what you enjoy by doing so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's sometimes it's in front of you and you don't see it. So, a lot of times folks will say, well, I'm trying to find what I'm really passionate about or what I want to do as a career, and they struggle with it. And I think, a lot of times you vote for your passion every day with your free time. So people don't realize that when you have that moment, what are you doing? Now, sometimes we're just watching Netflix or we're doing whatever, and that's okay. But when you pull back the onion on how you're spending your time, and you think for clues, for me, anytime I had free moment, I was writing something or I was teaching something. And I realized that pretty quickly, and I said, somehow I got to get a career that allows me to do those two things. And you looked at all of them, the experiences that you had, and you said, HR is a great place to do that because, number one, you can, write courses, you can go out and teach courses, but you have to earn the right to be able to do that. You can't just walk into your dream job. So you have to be willing to take a couple of steps that says, okay, well, how am I going to get there? And that's about taking risks, and that's about, dealing with rejection, and just, taking the next step to get closer and closer as you make those connections and get those skills to get your dream job.
Mm-hmm. So what was the first step that you took then to get, you're selling sales, so you're selling training, is that right?
So yeah, it took a bit to get even to that part, right? So I was in the sales, so writing led me to a sales gig. So I started writing newsletters for a sales company, and then I learned the business to be in sales. And then at that point, I realized, hey, out of all the things, I can do this. But nuclear industry, they were closing plants. I look around, every 20 years older than I was. Yeah. It's not going to be a long-term career.
No,
but no. I loved teaching, and I loved writing. And so I went and took a job in a nonprofit, and I taught college at night. And so I did both of those. It gave me a little bit of writing and a little bit of teaching. And at that point, I saw, it's kind of a cool thing around rejection, but I saw this ad for a global OD role. And I was like, this is fantastic. This is everything that I want to do. And I just ridiculously naively jumped in and applied for this role and somehow got an interview. But it became clear, I think around 37 seconds into this interview, that I was in no way qualified for this job, like just ridiculous. But the person who was interviewing me was amazingly cool. And what he did was he gave me sort of a debrief on the job. He said, hey, you got some things, you're really making strides in certain areas, but you're missing this whole laundry list of skills that you need to have. So you have to say no, but if you're looking for guidance, this is what to chase. So I went and back to the school. I was, doing two different jobs. One of my students at the college I was teaching got a job in a company. He calls me a couple of months later and says, you need to come here and work. So he gets me this job at this, what it turns out to be a training company. And I started selling their training services. And then I started writing their training materials. I got some time in the classroom. So I brokered one thing to the next. And then ultimately, a couple of years later, I kind of conclude the story here, I saw another ad in the paper for an OD role. I said, this looks familiar. This is kind of cool. So I answered the ad, got the interview. Turns out it was the same company with the same guy.
No way.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. 3 years later. And so he's looking at the thing and he says, I have to tell you, he says, you're still missing some skills, but man, you checked a bunch off in the last 3 years. And he goes, anybody who's going to do that, I could take a chance on. And
you're willing to learn, right?
Exactly. And that was super. I mean, that's where kind of, everything comes into perspective of, you work a little bit, you take a little chance, you take a rejection on the chin and you keep going. And then I got lucky. And that was super cool.
Moving forward to where we are now, obviously we're a long way down the line. What are you currently obsessed with? What's really top of mind for you? What are you currently working on?
So now in the role, so I took a few roles in OD and change, and worked through actually in project management and M&A to keep kind of working, and then ultimately landed having been on the periphery of HR for a long time in different functions, now heading up HR. And this is a great role after spending a career going very deep in certain specific areas, now having a breadth of responsibility for a global organization. It's really interesting. And for me, there's always the things that you want to do around putting in infrastructure and systems and processes and trying to drive culture. All of those things are important. But as you do that, what I try to keep in mind is not lose the lessons that I had in the past, is to consistently challenge and question things that come up and try to get at the best right answer when things come up. And that seems to be healthy to build a culture that kind of explores a little bit and, keep the baseline of everything done, but make sure that you keep pushing the envelope a little bit.
You were talking about before the show, and I'm stealing this already, I told you already, and we both agree on this, and we're talking about HR isn't HR. And how we've seen, when all of the different functions go through their own sort of digital transformation, now it's HR's turn. Could you share your thoughts on that with our listeners? Because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I think there's a classic HRBP, the classic generalist work that's done, but that is table stakes. That's a baseline. So if you're thinking about HR driving your career within HR, you have to know that to a degree. But HR is so much more than that now. If you think about the work that you get involved in, there's social media, there's marketing, there's communications. You're working on things with legal and finance. I got that lesson in that picture as I worked in an M&A, and you're sitting in the middle of diligence cases and working on that. But it goes beyond those events. It's every day now. You have to think about all of this. And so you can really have a exciting career where you're building a portfolio of skills that can be used in a variety of different ways. And you have to. And it's such light years away from where HR used to be. There's this, I would say that HR for a long time had an image problem. And it was a self-image problem. It said, oh, we need to get a seat at the table. We have to try to figure this out or that out. But I compare that to any other part of the organization or department. I use the example of IT. Well, IT had the same sort of struggles. They weren't, now they treat everything like a project. They have a great financial backing. They work through things diligently. But not so long ago, they were just, plugging in the projector, right? I mean, you flash back 30 years ago.
Honestly,
right?
I remember in my old company, it's like, oh, just put computers that work in the school IT. There was no strategic,
Exactly.
value they were adding. It was more just, the manual tasks on a daily basis. Yeah.
And it's totally changed. And I think we're starting to see that now as we get into, workforce analytics, and we're getting into not only the, having the data, but interpreting the data and making decisions around the organization, attracting people to the organization, and trying to ensure that they stay and you get the right people driving performance. All of these things are huge, meaty, incredible things that you could be doing in HR. And, my question is, why would you want to do anything else? Why, what other career is going to give you that depth and breadth of responsibility and interesting things to do? Folks should be lined up to be working in HR these days.
Because HR is one of those rare functions that they're interacting with all different functions in the organization. They're kind of like in the middle.
Yeah.
Because whenever I speak to the HR, because you've got every other leader, where it's a CMO, CEO, CFO, they're all coming to HR at some point for the talent, for their business units, etc. Right? So they're like, it's so interesting. And the most successful leaders, that I always say this on the show, people are sick of hearing it, but the most successful CHROs that I speak to always spend time in the different functions.
Yeah,
getting to learn and actually move careers in most cases, and go and work in sales for a little while, go and work in the manufacturing facility, go and work in marketing, and then work their way back to do that. And that's how they've learned. So for yourself personally, because it's quite overwhelming, the change that it's gone through, how have you managed to keep yourself up to date with current events and stay relevant, I suppose?
Well, actually doing, pretty much what you suggested. So, I take everything on as a challenge. I mean, maybe that's the thing. If somebody looks at me and says, well, can you do this? I go, I'll do it twice. I'll prove it to you. And so I have that kind of that old attitude, right? But as an example, we're running projects in HR, and you can run a PMO, but then you get questions from a business who are legitimate project. I would say legitimate project manager in the case. Say, well, should you go out and now actually work in the business as a project manager, get credentials as a project manager, go through your PMP or whatever certification you want to actually understand the rigors of, we're not just doing a communication plan or a change plan, but we're going to look at everything. We're going to risk and the portfolio of communication and everything that goes into those plans. And just know that as part of the business. The other thing then, just your organization and trying to figure out what's important, and so that you can actually be walking into a room and no one knows that you're the HR person. And that's the ideal. If you're having a conversation and they can't place your profession, you're doing it right.
Tell us about the TED Talk, because that was very interesting. I only discovered that recently. I was like, why didn't I know about this before?
Yeah, so the TED Talk was entitled I Am Diversity. And I wrote it initially as going to be a blog or an article because I had been to another HR conference where people were saying the same things about diversity. And I actually found myself leaving this one event kind of mad. I was like, why are we addressing this the same way, doing it over and over again and not getting the same results? And so I put pen to paper and put together this thought around, if we were to let go completely of the way things are done now and removed sort of the check boxes and the labels and got down to actually looking at people as individuals. And the tagline that I use is that, you've seen my picture. And as, me, I'm the old straight white guy. And, there's all the things that come with that. And you could look at a picture and make a decision on things, but you haven't seen my movie. And you don't know the backstory to that. And everybody comes with a movie that informs kind of what they do. So just because you have, two people who look alike doesn't mean there's no diversity of thought. And that's really what we want to get to, is so diversity important. Of thought.
Yeah. It's funny because when people see me, they probably see my LinkedIn profile again, white guy, but they don't realize that I grew up in East London where I was a minority.
Yeah.
Where there was 2 white guys in my class. It was mainly black guys, Indian guys, Asian, and then white guys.
Yeah.
So when I actually moved into the corporate world, it was actually quite strange, and this may seem really strange to everyone listening, to walk on a sales floor and it be predominantly white males. Because I grew up in a classroom full of a very diverse group of individuals. And I was even told on my first day by my sales director that we need to teach you how to speak proper English. Because I came from East London where the slang or the way we use certain words, because I was from such a diverse cultural area, that, it was different from everyone else. And I didn't even realize I was different until I went into central London to London Bridge from East London and to West London. And all of a sudden I actually was a minority in the workplace as a white guy, which was like weird.
Yeah.
And so no one would know that, to your point, no one would know that about me, or the fact that, my wife's black and I have a mixed race child, etc., etc. So what was the key message in your TED talk? What did you want people to walk away from it, and take away from it?
The call to action was to let go of the antiquated diversity programs that we have that really just reinforce stereotypes, that really haven't moved the needle, aren't doing the right thing, and instead begin to do a much harder job, but to actually consider individuals and consider the story. It's more time consuming, but at the end of the day, it's a much fairer process, and you get to a place where all folks are valued. And that's ultimately what is that people take time to understand everybody's backstory. And that's why I shared a little bit of mine in the beginning here, because I think it gives context to where people are coming from, where they're going, and what they bring. So many times in an organization, we don't understand all of the incredible attributes that people could bring. Even professionally, just because you're doing a job today, you get pigeonholed. So you're a trainer. They say, oh, you're just a trainer. He might have been a lawyer before. He might have worked in compensation before. He might have done. Ask the question, and then you'll get much more value out of folks. And that's important.
Well, my next question was, how do we do that? You've said the most important thing, ask questions. Don't assume, right? Ask the questions, because you don't know. Absolutely. You don't know. If you don't ask the question, you don't know. And there's so many times I found out amazing things about my employees, like a year in. I'm like, wow, you're good at video editing. Oh, I could have. If I would have known that, it'd been really helpful.
Yeah,
There's so many different things. So what other advice would you give to people then? So obviously asking questions is a very important one, but what other advice do you give to people that want to rethink the way they approach diversity?
Yeah, I think there's also then putting it to use. So getting the information, but you can't just have it. You have to look to employ it. And then being a way that employing it in a way that matches not only the person's drive, but the organizational need. So your example was a good one. So you need, an editor, and, getting to know some employees that have that skill set, that is a great thing, because number one, that might be something they want to do and further their career. On the other side, it might be something they don't want to do anymore, and that's why they didn't talk about it, right? Yeah. But let's go on the positive side and say, hey, this is really what I wanted to do. That just saved the organization some money. Don't go to a vendor to do that. So that's huge. It could also grow them into a position. Thing gets bigger, all of a sudden they're doing more. So I think that balance is really important.
Before we jumped in as well, you was talking about creativity and challenging. We spoke a little bit already about challenging, what HR is, but what about our own personal creativity? And because I feel like a lot of people, me and you seem to be quite strange people in the sense that we love pain and we run towards it, and we like challenging ourselves to push ourselves to learn new things. And I feel like it's something that, especially as a HR leader, you kind of have to do that. Otherwise, you're not going to survive very long in an HR role. But what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think there's certain things if you're afraid of something or hesitant to do it, that means you really need to go and try it, and it's going to be uncomfortable. So if public speaking, I said in the talk, I'm a really wild introvert, right? So that talk, just to prep for it, was tough, but
Yeah, I know
you
how
kind
that
of make it
feels.
happen. Exactly. So you do it, but I think you can certainly run past fear. Engage the things that you're not good at and try to even them out. But if that seems like a bridge too far for you, then what you can also do is just begin to question things. I think a lot of times leaders get trapped. They see something on a slide that's been mentioned over and over again, and they just accept it rather than take the attitude of um, healthy questioning, not being cynical, but just have the view of For example, people have said a lot of consultants will say, I think for the last 20 years or so, that 70% of change efforts fail. And I just sit and go, fail to do what? Is it they missed the whole boat? What's the deal?
It's a lot of,
Folks.
yeah, it's a lot to break down there.
Yeah, and so you kind of talk. So what's it? Or my other favorite one is folks will say, like, I think what the number was, but like 83% of communication is nonverbal. Well, how are we doing this podcast? You dig back the number. It looks really good on a slide, and it makes them for some funny stuff in a training session. But you break it out, and actually, we're talking about congruence. So, if I say, oh, how you doing, and you say, well, everything's great, living the dream, falling asleep. Okay, you're more apt to believe the body language, but it's not that. So I'd say look past the slide, question things, and then get value for your organization, because sometimes they're little funny things, and sometimes they're huge, costly things for the organization. For what was it, for years, people were running that 70-20-10 model of learning, completely wrong. Right? They took
Yep.
something, that it was totally out of whack. It drove me nuts. I'm like, you forgot about the part that was hardship, that they can't reproduce. 14% of that. So look beyond, look under the hood, challenge some things, and make sure you're doing the right thing for your people in your organization.
Yeah, it was one of the things that was stopping me from starting this company, because there's all these scary numbers out there about how many startups fail, how many
Yeah.
make it, how many go bust after the first 2 years. And if you start looking into that, it's a very scary dark hole to go down, right? And I was looking at it with my business partner, and obviously it was very, we both, I'd been in my job for over 13 years, him 5 years, very, very good jobs, very, good salaries. And it's like, what do we want to risk ourselves to be one of those 1 in 3 or whatever the numbers it were,
Yeah.
right? And when we looked into it, as you said, in more detail, we realized we don't fit into half of these categories, because a lot of them are tech startups that are VC backed, for example. We don't even fit into that category, so let's just wipe all of that out. We're not even remotely into, and most of the time it was due to sales, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas actually that was our number one skill, because we literally were both sales directors. So generating revenue was our own, that was the thing we was amazing at. So when we first started this company, it was like, okay, we've just made 20,000-30,000 pounds in the first few weeks. We're okay. We're not going to, so all of the reasons these guys have gone, bust, because obviously they couldn't pay the bills. So
Yeah.
we're like, let's go for it. And then the biggest challenge for us was the opposite, was actually the business processes, the finance, the operations, the marketing,
Oh, wow.
all of the other things that for everyone else was easy because they'd studied business, right? We had the complete opposite skill set, which was actually making money. So
Yeah.
it's only once we looked into that and realized that everyone's failing because they can't sell. If you can't sell your product, then obviously you're going to fail. You can't pay the salaries, and obviously you're not going to have a company. And we were like, this is easy. So the selling part has always been our strength as a co-founder. Both of our co-founders, our skill set's always been around in sales and generating revenue. Our biggest challenge right now is growing the companies. Actually, what a coincidence! Talent, right? Recruiting.
Well,
I work in HR.
well, it's funny. It really is funny. So you look at creativity and practical applications of that. I like to turn things on their head. So a lot of folks will do interviews or look at assessments to screen people out. Why not take a look at somebody's background and say, how do I screen them in? How do I take what they have and, okay, maybe they're applying for the wrong job. Maybe there's another way to fit them in, because the pain process of going through getting so many folks within the organization and going through that funnel, it's a similar funnel to sales. It really is. If you look at the employee cycle and the
I'm
sales
finding
cycle,
it out.
very
I'm finding
similar.
it out. Yeah. I'm finding it out. I'm really finding it. And the problem is, as a startup, you kind of want to take someone, you want to just hire someone because you think they're going to solve it, but you realize that actually rushing that process is probably the worst possible thing you can do, which is trying to build a solid foundation. At the moment, we're 6 people here, but it's taken a year and a half, which is a long time for us to build up I think the first thing was just actually building enough revenue, a lot of a nest egg of revenue into the bank account to feel comfortable actually in the first place to hire people. And then you're like sitting there in the interview when I worked for a business beforehand, I wasn't sitting there saying, am I happy to pay this person out of my own bank account?
Yeah.
And now look back, I'm like, I wouldn't have hired there's a lot of people I wouldn't have hired when I worked in those companies if it was coming out of my own bank account, which sounds really bad. And I'm sure a lot of people, they won't maybe not admit it, but I'm sure they'd say that's also true. But now it's my company and every single penny comes out of my own personal bank account. Yep. You sit there and you ask a few more questions and you make sure they're the right fit, right? And that every single person's a superstar player and they add value to the company.
So it's funny you say that, because I mean that when you're having that conversation and you're looking at it from a financial perspective, looking at performance becomes really easy. Yes. If you're writing the check, there's no debates, there's no competencies, there's none of that. It's like, okay, would I hire this person again? Are they adding value? Are they driving? All that stuff goes away because it becomes very practical.
It's very quick. You're right. And that's when I look around the room, I know every single person's contributing. And I know exactly how they contribute. And more importantly, they know how they're contributing it too. And they understand their role and what that means for the company. And especially with a small team, you can't get away from that. They know how much we're generating. They're in the room when we're making these deals. They can see everything. They see the P&L. So like they know what's happening, right? They're part of the building blocks of this organization. That's a very strange place to be from where I used to be, where I had 25 sales guys that didn't see the P&L, didn't understand what was happening on the back end, nothing along those lines. They just got paid their salary and delivered their goals. Whereas in a small company, it's you have to be very transparent. Well, that's what I found has worked anyway.
Oh, absolutely. You jump up engagement when you do that. You increase the transparency, and people are excited to be there. All of a sudden, it's Monday, Yeah,
and all of a sudden, they don't know. They are learning so many new things themselves.
Yep.
Because they've never been exposed. I'm sitting there bringing them into our marketing strategy. They're like, what am I doing in this meeting? They love it. They're like, oh, wow, this is how that works. And, this is how we do the operations, and this is how that's delivered. And this is how we get payments, Chris. Oh, it's great because it goes through the Stripe payments. And, they're really excited about these things that you don't really realize until you bring them on board. And they come back with really good ideas too. So, going a bit off topic here, but I think it's very, very, very important. I wish I managed my team in a business the same way that I do here. It's only because I was kind of forced to here that I realized the benefits of being more transparent. I think it was also a lot of people probably can relate to this, that they had managers where information was basically your commodity, basically. It's like whoever the higher you are in the organization, the more information you're privy to.
Yeah,
that was kind of the hierarchy that I worked in. My sales director had more information than I did. The CEO had more information than they did, and that's kind of had. But now we're in this day and age of social media, and as we discussed, and that's gone now.
Well, I think the organizational currency is changing. So for a lot of times it was, how many people do you manage? How big is your budget? How much information? And now I think it's a really good thing, but it's starting to change into what effect do you have on people? So if you're seen as a talent developer, even if you're topped out in your career, you're bringing folks in, and everybody who works for you is doing better. That is incredibly valuable. That's how you drive bonus for folks and make sure that they're super happy, because there is such a value. People ask themselves, well, am I a good manager? The answer is easy. When you have an open position, how many folks are lined up to work for you? Mm-hmm. And if they are, then that's because you're adding value. And what I say is very, very simple. If somebody's working for you and they look the same in December that they did in January, somebody failed. They have to learn something new. They have to add value. And I'm very open with my guys, and I'll pull out the resume and we'll talk and say, okay, what did you add? If you were going to put another line item on this, what would that be? What would the learning that you had? Make sure that you have that product, because I want you to be successful, hopefully stay here. But, in life, I want you to do really well, because things come around. And, it's a small world. So I want folks to do really well.
And you want them to be better than you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I remember it was really hard for me, by the way, from a salesperson, because you're always pitted against everyone. So I was always like, you're always like, who's going to be the number one salesperson? So when I became a manager, I was like, it was really hard to let go of those reins and hand them over to people that I was developing and pushing through. And that was a real learning curve for me. I remember when one of my first sales guys, Omri, I remember him now, sort of broke my sales records and I was really upset about it. But then I realized actually I should be so happy. And I really was after, because I was the person that built that person to help Omri achieve that. Then I kind of just, and then from that moment onwards, I always looked at it as you've said, is my job is to help develop those guys. But the problem was that the company I worked within, the compensation wasn't set up that way. Mm-hmm. So, and that can be really detrimental. As you said, if you're giving bonuses based on that, then it's incredible. But if you're in a company like I've worked in, where you've still got your own personal sales target, and then you've got your team's target, where do you focus your attention?
Well, of course, you're going to focus on yours. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. Do I focus my attention on building my team, developing them, being through, or do I hit my own sales bonuses and make a little bit more money? So you need to make sure that your compensation is in line with that, otherwise it can go really wrong. And I've seen that in not just that company, by the way, multiple businesses that I've worked in, where they've got the managers like, where's the incentive for me to even manage these people? And there's so many people that I know, friends of mine personally, that manage teams that are like, I would rather not be this director. I'd rather go back to being a salesperson or someone who's just adding value on their own.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, your theory of all the things you want to do in an organization has to marry up with your practices. And if they don't, we talked about this a bit before, but then you've sold a false narrative to folks. You promise something and they come in and then it's not what you promised and it doesn't work.
They leave very quickly.
Exactly.
And you lose a lot of talent that way. So, yeah. So where do you see, and it's a big question because we've gone around and we've touched on a lot of things. What do you think the future of HR looks like? We've talked before about, looking more like marketing, bringing in social media marketing, etc. And obviously technology is a massive part. But what is in 10 years from now, what do you think HR is going to look like?
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot more automation. I think some of the tasks, even at smaller companies, and there's a big delta between what a large company can do and what a smaller company can do, just from organizational infrastructure footprint. But in general, I think there's going to be much more automation for systems and processes, and trying to outsource or automate tasks that really don't drive a lot of value. They're important, they need to be done, but they shouldn't have the mind share and the time share that they do right now. And once that is done, then I think the profile of your HR person changes dramatically. There's always going to be the folks that need to understand laws in different countries and processes and so forth, but you become then much more of a consultative component around driving the business initiatives. And I think that's sometimes it's in the strategic planning group that looks at goals. But a lot of times HR is doing that. You're driving, how do you get from mission to strategic initiatives to scorecard to what people do every day, and threading that storyline and actually making it happen is huge. And HR is going to have a huge involvement in that. Yeah.
Well, that leads us quite nicely on some quick fire round.
All right.
I just realized now the time. I've kept you for an hour already. Sorry, everyone listening is like, how long is this podcast going to be? But I think we can talk about, I'm sure everyone's really eagerly listening away, and we can all talk about this for a long, long time, but I'm conscious of time. And this, I know you listen to the show, so you already know what's coming. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You have no longer than 30 seconds to give us amazing answers. Are you ready?
I'm ready to go.
What was the number one thing that's holding you back from being a senior HR leader?
Yeah, for me, it was just having perspective of what could actually be achieved. So I think it's really important to have a mentor to show you that, and then pay it back and be a mentor.
Fantastic. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
Don't fake it till you make it.
Don't fake it till you make it.
Don't fake it till you make it. I think there's a really big difference, and I feel pretty passionate about this. There's a difference between having imposter syndrome and being an imposter. And you have to punch your weight. You have to do the work and then get it. So it's pretty important to me that you do that. And that's a martial art background. If you fake it, you get knocked to the canvas.
Yeah, no, I understand. I think people interpret the wrong. I interpret fake it to make it as you do. It's just the way a lot of people don't.
Exactly.
I get your point. My idea of fake it to make it is, same with the podcast. I wanted to do this, and I was learning how to do it whilst doing it and delivering value and actually making it happen at the same time, not just pretending that I've got this podcast.
Yeah. Being totally transparent about it. Don't ask for permission. Just make it happen. But what's going on. That's cool. Absolutely.
Exactly. And I still get that all the time. But that's, for me, that's the part that I find the most exciting, is that learning process. It's never really, and people have heard me say this before, it's never for me, it's never about the end goal. It's always about the journey. I love the journey of just jumping into something new and learning, failing miserably, getting back up, going at it again. And there's no better feeling, I feel personally, than to do that. And that know you've kind of persevered. So fantastic. What's one book or some books that you'd recommend to our audience, and why?
Sure. I think every time I take a new job, it's an old one, but read the first 90 days every time I take a new job. I think that's really helpful. A lot of folks are probably familiar with Sun Tzu, Art of War. Different one, though, is Funakoshi. Funakoshi has a book, The 20 Guiding Principles of Karate. And even if you're not a martial artist, they're really, really helpful in business and life.
Fantastic. And could you share one internet resource that you use to keep up to date?
And so current events, there's a thing called Side Hustle School. I really enjoy that because it gives you a different perspective of small businesses, creative ways to look at business, and it gets you out of your big company HR mindset or your current thing and just thinking differently. That's super helpful.
Is that a podcast?
It's a podcast. It's a net. It's really fantastic.
Do you know the guy's name?
Chris Gillipo, I think, runs that.
I know that name. Yeah, I think I've listened to some of those before. So I'll link that. I'll find that and link it up in the description for everyone. And last question, obviously, where you are now, what's one thing about your business you're most excited about today?
Driving our culture and creating aha moments around it. So we have our focus is driving accountability, efficiency, and ambition. And then our values, we have passion, persistence, and courage. That sounds a little familiar, but it's kind of
but it works, right?
It works, and it's super cool, and we're jazzed about it, and I'm really excited.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much, Tim, for taking the time out to join us. Love the conversation. I'm sure we can chat forever.
I really appreciate it.
Before we wrap up, give our listeners, if there's one parting piece of guidance you can give to all of the HR leaders out there, what would that be? And also, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you if they have any questions or want to reach out?
Sure. Guidance is to let go of your shoulds. A lot of people will tell you what path to take, what job to take. You don't have to listen to that. Let go of your shoulds. Do what you most want to do. As far as getting in contact with me, I'm the only Tim Toterhi on the planet. So, timtoterhi.com is there. You got LinkedIn. You got all kinds of
domain, right? Okay.
All the crazy things. So so happy to have conversations around that. So thanks so much for this. It's been a real pleasure.
No problem. I'm excited, and I'll also link up your TED Talk for everyone.
Oh, fantastic!
To listen to. You guys definitely got to check that out as well. I'm actually halfway through. I'm probably going to finish it after the show. So for everyone listening as well. So guys, as always, head over to hrdealers.com. You'll find the show notes for an episode. Everything we're talking about, we're linked in there for you. All the resources there. Thank you again for taking the time to join us, and I wish you all the best until we next.